Rain hammered the little cottage like 1,000 tiny fists. Inside, a chair lay shattered against the wall, a table overturned, broken dishes scattered across the floor, and blood, so much blood, soaking dark into the wood. A woman lay crumpled beside a cold fireplace, bruised, beaten, barely breathing. The kind of stillness that comes only after someone has decided a person is worth nothing at all. And then, a sound, soft, tiny, almost swallowed by the storm. A sniffle from inside a locked cupboard, a child, hidden in the dark, listening to every second of it. She had served them quietly for years, head down, asking for nothing, and they had called her lazy, difficult, nothing. But someone does not beat a nobody nearly to death and lock her child away in the dark. Someone does that to bury a secret. And some secrets do not stay buried. Rain came down hard that night, not soft, not gentle. It fell like the sky itself had something to grieve. It hammered the rooftops of the mountain pack, drummed against stone and timber, and turned every road into a river of mud. At the far edge of the forest, where the trees stood old and silent, a small cottage waited alone. It was the kind of place most people forgot existed. A servant's cottage. Nothing important. Nothing worth a second glance. And yet, on this night, it was the only thing that mattered. Cassian Thorne stood at the edge of the dirt road, and something inside him would not settle. His wolf had been restless since morning, pacing, growling low beneath his skin, refusing every command to be still. He did not understand it. He only knew that when Alara Hale failed to appear at the palace that day, the unease had started like a splinter beneath the ribs, and it had grown ever since. He had told himself it was nothing. A servant missed a day. It happened. People fell ill. People overslept. It was not the concern of an alpha king, but the woman at his side that morning had made it something more. Vespera Kane had heard the news and simply smiled that slow, careful smile of hers. "She is probably hiding somewhere," she had said, tilting her head. "That girl has always been lazy." Lazy. The word had sat wrong in his mouth, though he could not say why. Because no one worked harder than Alara Hale. He had seen it in the way he saw most things, without ever truly looking. Never late, never rude, never asking for anything. A quiet figure moving through the halls of the palace with her head down and her hands full, and her eyes always somewhere else. And Vespera hated her. That was the part that never made sense. The hatred was too large for a servant, too old, too hungry. As though Alara had done something to her once, long ago, something no one else remembered. And whenever Cassian looked at the girl himself, his wolf stirred, not with desire, not even with curiosity, recognition, as though the animal inside him knew something his mind had lost. He had pushed the thought away 100 times. He could not push it away tonight. The scent of the storm filled his lungs. Wet earth, pine, cold stone. But underneath it all, faint and wrong, something else waited on the wind. Something that made his chest tighten and his steps quicken without his permission. He climbed the small wooden steps. The door stood open, just slightly, just enough. Rain slipped through the gap and darkened the floorboards inside. "Alara?" His voice came out low, careful. Nothing answered him but the storm. His wolf snarled, sudden and sharp, and every hair on the back of his neck rose, and then the scent hit him full, and the world tilted. Blood. Fresh blood. His entire body went rigid. For one heartbeat, he did not move at all. He only stood there, hand against the door, while some deep and animal part of him begged him not to look, begged him to keep this one moment, the last moment before he knew, for just a little longer. Then he pushed the door wide, and what he saw would stay carved into him for the rest of his life. The room was ruin. A chair lay shattered against the wall, its legs snapped like kindling. A table overturned. Broken dishes scattered like teeth across the floor. A shelf torn half from its nails, hanging crooked in the dark. And blood. So much blood. It stained the wood in wide, spreading patches, black in the low light, and the smell of it flooded the little room until Cassian could taste iron on his tongue. His pulse thundered. Danger! 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 The word beat through him with every heartbeat, faster and faster, until it was less a warning than a scream. He moved deeper into the cottage, boots crunching over broken things. And then he saw her, a small shape, crumpled beside the cold fireplace. For one terrible second, the world simply stopped. Ilara. Her dark hair was tangled with blood. Bruises bloomed across her face like storm clouds gathering. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, the fabric dark and wet. One arm lay bent beneath her at an angle no living arm should bend. She looked as though someone had beaten her, and then stood back to watch, and then left her there to die alone in the dark. A sound tore out of his throat. Not quite human. Not quite wolf. Something ancient and broken, ripped up from a place he did not know he had. His eyes flashed. Power burst out of him without command, and the windows of the little cottage rattled in their frames. The walls seemed to shiver. The very air went heavy and electric, the way it does before lightning. Who had done this? Who had dared? The rage was so total, it left no room for anything else. Not thought, not breath. Only the burning need to find whoever had touched her and tear the world apart until he did. But then he was on his knees beside her, and the rage cracked open, and beneath it was only fear. His hands were shaking. Cassian Thorne's hands never shook. He pressed 2 fingers to the curve of her throat, so gently, so carefully, as though she might break further beneath even that. Please, please. There. A pulse. Weak. Far too weak. A thread stretched thin enough to snap at the smallest wind. But alive. The relief hit him so hard it nearly folded him in half. A rough breath left him. His forehead dropped just for a moment until it nearly touched hers. She was alive. She was still alive. And beneath his rage, beneath the fear, one thought rose up strange and quiet, and impossible to explain. Why does this feel like losing something I never knew I had? He had no answer. He only knew that kneeling here, with her broken body inches from his own, he felt something he had not felt in years. He felt like he had come home to find the house already burning. He did not have time to understand it, because that was when he heard the sound. Soft, tiny, almost swallowed by the rain. A sniffle. Cassian went still. His wolf went still. The sound came again, a small, frightened breath. A whimper held back by tiny lungs trying so very hard to be quiet, the way a child learns to be quiet only when quiet has kept them alive before. A child. Somewhere inside this room of blood and ruin, there was a child. Slowly, so slowly, he turned. His gaze moved across the wreckage, past the shattered chair, past the overturned table, until it settled on an old storage cupboard shoved against the far wall. The door was shut, locked from the outside, and from the seams of it poured the sharpest scent of fear he had ever known in his life. Someone had put a child in there. Someone had locked a child in the dark and left them to listen to everything. The thought lit a fire in him so hot it frightened even his wolf. He crossed the room. With every step, his heart pounded harder. Something about this felt impossible. Something about this felt like standing at the edge of a door he had spent years being too afraid to open. A door his mind had walled up, brick by careful brick. He reached the cupboard. He could hear breathing now, quick and shallow, on the other side of the thin wood. "It's all right," he said, and his voice came out rough and low and gentler than he knew it could be. "It's all right. No one is going to hurt you." The lock broke beneath his hand like it was nothing. The cupboard door swung open. Silence. And then, two enormous green eyes stared back at him from the dark. Cassian forgot how to breathe. A little boy sat curled inside, no more than 5 years old, small knees pulled tight to his chest, his arms wrapped around them. Tears cut clean tracks down cheeks that were far too pale. His whole body trembled, but Cassian barely noticed the fear, because he was staring at the child's face. The same midnight hair, curling at the ends the way his own did in the rain. The same green eyes. The same stubborn little set of the jaws. The same dimples, pressed faintly into cheeks, still wet with crying. The same face he saw every single morning in the mirror. The world tilted beneath his feet. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The Alpha King on his knees in the wreckage, and the trembling child in the dark, staring at each other across a distance that could not be measured in steps. Cassian's mind reached for an explanation and found nothing but static. A cousin, a coincidence, a trick of the light and the fear. But his wolf did not reach for anything. His wolf simply lay down inside him and ached, the way a creature aches when it finally finds the thing it has been hunting for so long, it forgot it was hunting at all. Then the boy's lower lip quivered. His frightened gaze drifted away from Cassian, toward the still shape of Alara on the floor, and back again. And in a voice so small it barely rose above the rain, a voice that cracked something deep in Cassian's chest and let the cold pour in. The child whispered, "Where's Mama?" Cassian could not speak. The question hung in the ruined air between them. Simple, terrible, and he had no answer to give. He looked at the boy. He looked at the woman on the floor. And for reasons he could not name, his eyes began to burn. "She's here," he managed at last. "She's here. She's just sleeping. I'm going to help her. I promise you. I'm going to help her." The child did not believe him. Cassian could see that. The boy had already learned, far too young, that promises were things adults made and broke, but he was too tired to argue, too frightened, too small. So he only nodded once and kept his eyes fixed on his mother as though looking away might be the thing that finally took her. Somewhere far behind them, thunder rolled across the mountains, and in that ruined little room, Kneeling between a broken woman and a hidden child who wore his own face, Cassian Thorne felt the first crack run through the story he had believed about his own life. He did not know yet how deep it went. He did not know that in the healing wing of the palace, the two people who had done this were already waiting, already composed, already certain in the smooth and quiet way of people who have never once been caught that they had won. He only knew what was in front of him. The woman everyone had called lazy, difficult, nothing. The quiet servant who kept her head down and asked for nothing and worked harder than anyone alive, and who had been beaten and broken and folded into the dark like something disposable. And the child she had hidden with her own body between her and the worst of it. Cassian gathered the boy gently into one arm. The child stiffened, then clung to his sleeve with both small fists, refusing to let go, his eyes never once leaving his mother. With his other arm, Cassian lifted Alara from the cold floor. She weighed almost nothing. That was the thing that undid him. Not the blood, not the bruises, the lightness of her. As though the world had been quietly taking pieces of her for years, one at a time, so slowly that no one ever noticed, until there was almost nothing left to hold. He held her against his chest. Her head fell against his shoulder, trusting in unconsciousness what she would never have trusted him with awake. And something in his wolf, something buried and aching and older than any memory he could reach, howled with a grief he could not name. Rain poured over the three of them as he carried them out into the storm. The woman who had been forgotten. The child who looked like a secret. And the man who did not yet understand that everything he thought he knew was a lie built carefully around him, brick by brick, by hands he had trusted his whole life. The cottage door swung shut behind them in the wind, and out there in the dark, on a road washed silver with rain, a story that had been buried for years, slowly, finally, began to wake. The palace gates burst open the moment they arrived. Guards rushed forward through the rain. Servants froze mid-step. Gasps rippled across the courtyard like wind through tall grass. Everyone knew Alara Hale. Everyone knew the quiet maid who kept her head down and never caused trouble and never asked for a thing. No one had ever seen her like this. Covered in blood, broken, barely breathing in the arms of the Alpha King himself. The sight of it stopped the whole courtyard cold. Cassian did not slow. "Move," he said, just one word. But the power in it sent healers scrambling and servants pressing themselves flat against the stone walls. He carried her straight through the great doors and into the healing wing. The child still clutched against his side, still refusing to let go. And through all of it, through the noise and the light and the rush of hurrying hands, Alara did not wake. But somewhere deep beneath the dark, she had fallen into. Something in her felt it, the change in the air, the scent of him, all around her, everywhere, warm and clean and impossibly familiar. And even unconscious, even broken, even years past the point of hoping, her body knew that scent. And it did not know whether to weep or to run. They laid her on a bed in the brightest room. Healers surrounded her at once, their hands quick and certain, murmuring to one another in low voices. The little boy tried to climb up after her. A healer stopped him gently, a hand on his small shoulder, and the child came apart. No. His voice cracked, high and desperate. No, Mama. Mama. He kicked. He struggled. He fought with everything his small body had. Cassian watched in silence, and his chest ached. Because the boy was not throwing a tantrum. He was terrified. Absolutely terrified. As though letting go of her for even 1 second might mean losing her forever. As though he had learned somewhere that people you love can simply vanish. The child finally broke free and ran to the bedside and grabbed his mother's limp hand in both of his. Only then did he go still. Only then did the fear ease from his scent. He stood there, holding on, watching her face for any sign at all. And Cassian stood several feet away and could not make himself look away from either of them. The resemblance was impossible. Every time the boy turned his head, Cassian saw himself, the same eyes, the same dark hair, the same stubborn jaw, even the dimples, moon above, even the dimples. An elderly healer approached him carefully. "Your Majesty," Cassian barely heard. "Your Majesty," the old man said again. Cassian blinked. What? The healer hesitated. His gaze drifted toward the child, then back to Cassian, then to the child once more. And Cassian already knew what he was thinking. The whole room was thinking it. The resemblance was too obvious, too complete, too impossible to explain away. The healer cleared his throat. "Forgive me for asking, Your Majesty," he said quietly, "but whose child is this?" Silence fell. The room seemed to hold its breath. Even the healers around the bed went still. Cassian looked at the boy. The boy looked at his mother. And a strange pressure built in Cassian's chest because for the first time in longer than he could remember, he wanted an answer to a question. He wanted it desperately, and he had none. "I don't know," he said. The words came out hollow. They tasted like a lie, though he did not know why. How could a man not know his own child? How could a man look at a face that was his own in miniature and say those words with any honesty at all? The healer looked unconvinced. Cassian could not blame him. He was not convinced either. He took a step toward the bed. The child stiffened at once. A low sound rose from the boy's small throat. A growl, tiny, weak, but unmistakably wolf. The room went silent again. Cassian stared. The boy stared back. Green eyes meeting green eyes. And for one brief moment, something flickered between them. Something sharp and sudden. Fear. Not Cassian's fear. The boy's. It moved through Cassian like a current, there and gone, and it left him breathless. Because only blood could carry a feeling like that. Only blood could pass a thread of emotion straight from one heart into another, without a single word. His own heartbeat thundered. Impossible. And yet the boy had gone pale, trembling, as though he had felt it too. As though something inside him had reached out and touched something inside Cassian and pulled back, frightened by what it found. Cassian opened his mouth, and that was when the doors flew open. "Cassian!" The voice echoed through the healing wing, bright and clear and perfectly composed. Vespera. The room went quiet in a different way now. The future Luna swept in exactly as she always did. Beautiful, elegant, not a hair out of place, not a crease in her gown, as though the storm outside had simply agreed not to touch her. And yet, something felt wrong. Cassian's wolf noticed it before his mind did. Danger. The warning moved through him low and cold. He frowned. His wolf had never reacted to Vespera like this. Not once in all the years he had known her. But now it would not stop its low, steady growl, a sound that lived just beneath his skin. Vespera did not seem to notice, or perhaps she was trying very hard not to, because her eyes had already found the child. And they stayed there. The boy felt it at once. He pressed himself against the side of the bed, against his mother, his small fingers tightening in the blanket. His eyes went wide, fearful. Cassian noticed the child had not reacted this way to the healers, not to the guards, not even to Cassian himself, not truly, not like this, only to her, only to Vespera. Interesting. A strange expression flickered across Vespera's face before it vanished, too fast for anyone else in the room to catch. But Cassian caught it, and his wolf certainly did. Fear, not annoyance, not jealousy, not the cool distaste she usually wore around anything beneath her station. Fear. "What happened?" Vespera asked, and her voice was soft, concerned, perfect. Cassian crossed his arms slowly. "I found Ilara in her cottage," he said. Vespera's throat moved, a small swallow. In her cottage. Beaten nearly to death. For the briefest moment, the color left her face. Cassian's eyes narrowed. Why would that trouble her? Surely a future Luna had not expected to find a servant in such a state. Surely the news should have brought nothing more than mild, distant pity, the kind high-born wolves handed out like coins. But this was not pity. This was something else, something that had been caught off guard. Vespera's gaze drifted toward the child again, and the little boy looked away at once, curling smaller, as though he could make himself disappear. Cassian felt another growl rumble low in his chest. Vespera stepped closer to the bed. Too close. The child pressed himself tighter into his mother's side, and his fear rolled off him like a scent through the whole room. Cassian felt it, and then, for one single dizzying second, he felt it inside his own chest. The same fear, the same panic, the same wild instinct to run and hide and hold on. It was gone as fast as it came, but it left Cassian standing very still. His wolf had gone silent. Bloodline. The thought moved through him before he could stop it. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Cassian. Vespera's voice pulled him back. "What?" he said. She smiled. Too quickly, too brightly. The way a person smiles when they are covering something with their whole face. Then she lowered her voice, and she leaned in, and she asked him the strangest thing. "Did the child say anything?" Cassian went cold. Not, "Is he all right?" Not, "Who is he?" Not, "Will Ilara live?" Her first concern, her only concern, was whether the boy had spoken. A cold weight settled in Cassian's stomach. "No," he said, watching her. And Vespera relaxed. He saw it happen. The smallest loosening of her shoulders. A breath she had been holding, quietly released. It lasted less than a heartbeat. But he saw all of it. And now he could not stop wondering why. Before he could press her, the doors opened once more, and the whole room straightened. Servants bowed, guards stepped aside. Even the healers paused in their work. The Queen Mother had arrived. Cordelia Thorne entered with her usual grace, silver hair swept back, posture regal. That cool, ageless intelligence in her eyes that had ruled this palace long before Cassian ever wore a crown. And the moment she saw the child, she stopped walking. Only for a heartbeat. But she stopped. Cassian's eyes narrowed. His mother never lost her composure. Not at funerals, not at war councils. Not once in all his life had he seen her steps falter. She recovered instantly, of course. "What is all this commotion?" she asked, her voice smooth as still water. Cassian watched her far too carefully. "Ilara was attacked," he said. His mother's gaze flicked toward the unconscious woman on the bed, then to the child, then back again, calculating, measuring, weighing something Cassian could not see. A strange tension filled the room, and Cassian had the sudden, dizzying feeling that everyone here knew something he did not, that he was the only one standing in the dark. Cordelia approached the bed. The little boy shrank away from her at once, the exact same way he had shrunk from Vespera. Cassian's wolf snarled inside him. The Queen Mother paused. Something unreadable crossed her face, and then she smiled, a smile that never once reached her eyes. "Poor child," she said softly, and Cassian felt something stir at the very edge of his memory. A fragment, small, almost nothing, years ago. A sickness that had nearly taken him. A stretch of days he could never quite remember. His mother's voice, gentle and insistent, telling him to rest, to recover, to let the past stay in the past. The memory slipped away before he could catch it, leaving only a dull ache behind his eyes. Cassian pressed his fingers to his temple. His wolf paced, restless, wrong. Something was wrong here. Something was very, very wrong. Then one of the healers stepped forward. "Your Majesty." Cassian looked up. The man seemed nervous, unusually so. His hands would not stay still. "What is it?" The healer swallowed hard. His gaze moved to the child, then to Vespera, then to the Queen Mother. As though he were afraid of the answer he carried. As though he could feel, without knowing why, that the truth in his mouth was dangerous. Finally, he spoke. "The injuries," he said, "they were not caused by rogues." Silence. The whole room seemed to freeze. "What do you mean?" Cassian said, very quietly. The healer took a shaking breath. "She was tortured, Your Majesty." The word landed like a blade dropped onto stone. Tortured. The room went colder, much colder. Cassian's eyes darkened until the green in them nearly vanished. Someone had not simply attacked Ilara. Someone had hurt her slowly, on purpose, with patience. Someone had wanted something from her, or wanted to make her suffer, or both. And across the room, hidden behind two carefully arranged faces, Vespera and the Queen Mother exchanged the smallest glance, a single look, half a second, gone before it began. Most people would have missed it entirely. Cassian did not. His wolf did not. And for the first time that night, standing between the broken woman and the trembling child and the two women who wore such perfect calm, Cassian began to suspect that what had happened to Ilara Hale had not been random at all, that it had a shape, a purpose, a hand behind it, and that somehow, in some way he could not yet name, the answer had everything to do with the little boy holding his mother's hand. The little boy with green eyes. The little boy who wore his face. Cassian looked down at the child once more, and the child, sensing his gaze, looked up. For a long moment they simply held each other's eyes across the quiet room. Two strangers, bound by something neither of them yet understood. And far beneath the dark she had sunk into, Ilara Hale drifted and dreamed. And in her dream she stood on a road washed silver with rain, waiting, the way she had waited 1,000 nights, waiting for someone who never came, not knowing that this time he had finally arrived. Morning came slow and gray. The storm had passed, but it left the world washed out and still, the kind of stillness that settles after something has broken and cannot be put back the way it was. Ilara woke to unfamiliar light. For a long moment she did not move. She only lay there, breathing air that smelled of clean linen and healing herbs, and something warmer underneath. Something she refused to let herself name. Then the pain came. It rolled through her all at once, and with it came the memory, the cottage, the fists, the voices above her, the cupboard door slamming shut on her son's terrified face. Silas! His name tore out of her, rough and cracked, and she tried to rise. Pain shot down her spine and stole the breath from her lungs. Silas! Mama. The voice was small, and it was right beside her. When Ilara turned her head, there he was, curled in a chair pulled close to the bed, a stuffed toy tucked under one arm, his other hand wrapped tight around two of her fingers, as though he had held them through the whole long night and never once let go. Her whole body went soft with relief. The tears came before she could stop them. Alive. He was alive. He was here. She pulled him close with her good arm and pressed her face into his hair and simply breathed him in. I thought you weren't coming back, he whispered into her neck. His voice shook. I thought you left me. Something in her chest broke open. Never, she said, fierce, certain. Never. Do you hear me? I will never leave you. The words came without thought, without hesitation, as though she had made that promise 1,000 times before, as though it were the last true thing left in the world. And then she saw where she was. Her eyes moved slowly across the room, the rich fabrics, the carved wood, the crest carved above the cold hearth, the palace, his palace. And when she finally lifted her gaze and found him standing near the door, watching her with those green eyes she had spent so long trying to forget, everything inside her went quiet and cold. Cassian Thorne, the man who had saved her, the man who had abandoned her. He took a careful step forward. You're safe, he said. The words were meant to comfort. She could hear that. She could even hear the care buried underneath them. And that was the worst part, because once she would have given anything to hear this man say those two words. Now they turned her stomach. Something old rose up in her, deep, slow, built over years of silence. It filled her eyes. It hardened her face. And she watched something in him flinch at whatever he saw there. You've been unconscious nearly a day, he went on. The healers, they said. He stopped, because she was not listening. She was staring at him, not with fear, not with gratitude, not even with simple anger, with hatred, the pure kind, the kind that takes years of quiet to build, the kind a person only feels towards someone who was once everything. Cassian saw it, and it stopped him where he stood, because that hatred was not aimed at a king. It was not the wary distance of a servant before her lord. It was personal, unbearably personal, as though he had reached into her chest with his own two hands and taken something that could never be returned. And the terrible thing, the impossible thing, was that he could not remember doing it at all. He stepped closer. Instinct more than thought. His hand lifted toward her arm. "Don't touch me." The words cut through the room like a blade. Everyone froze. The healers, the servants, even the guards past the door went still. Ilara pulled back so hard she nearly tore her wounds open again, and the hatred flared in her eyes, raw and burning and old. Cassian stood rooted in place, because that was not the flinch of a maid before a king. That was the recoil of a woman who had once let this man in completely and had bled for it every day since. His wolf whimpered. Actually whimpered. A sound Cassian had never heard it make. Not toward a stranger, not toward a servant, not toward any woman he did not care for. A sharp pain lanced through his chest and was gone. And for one horrible moment, the Alpha King felt guilty. Guilty for something he could not name. Guilty for something he could not remember. Ilara turned her face away from him, as though the very sight of him sickened her. And that wounded him far more than it had any right to. She did not thank him. She would not. She lay there in that borrowed bed, in that gilded room, and she made herself a promise while he stood watching her like a man staring at a locked door he had lost the key to. She would take nothing from these people that she did not have to. Not their comfort, not their pity, not their gentleness, because she had learned the hard way what the gentleness of powerful people cost. Years ago, she had opened her door to a stranger in the rain. She had asked for nothing. She had given everything, and the world had punished her for it, slowly, quietly, for 6 long years. She would not make that mistake twice. So when the healers brought her food, she ate only enough to keep her strong. When the servants offered her fine clothes, she kept her own. And when Cassian came to her door, again and again, she gave him her silence and her cold eyes, and nothing more. But silence, she had learned, was a kind of watching, and she was watching everything. Over the days that followed, Cassian kept returning to her wing far more than he had any reason to. He told himself it was the attack. Someone had nearly murdered a servant under royal protection. That alone demanded answers. It was a lie, and he half knew it. He kept coming back because of the boy. Silas fascinated him, confused him, would not leave his thoughts. Every stubborn frown, every small serious look, every flash of temper quickly swallowed. It was like watching himself, made small again, and his wolf would not stop its low, steady whisper. Mine. He hated the word. It made no sense, and still, with every passing day, it grew harder to silence. One afternoon, he found the boy on the floor near the fireplace, a scatter of little wooden wolves around him, arranging them into careful rows. Silas looked up. The smile faded from his face. His shoulders drew in. Cassian lowered himself into the chair across from him and said nothing for a while. The silence was not unkind, only careful. At last he picked up one of the carved wolves. "What's this one?" The boy glanced over. "That's the Alpha." The Alpha. Cassian turned it slowly in his fingers. "And this one?" Silas pointed to the smallest wolf of all. "That's Mama." Cassian's brow furrowed. "She's the smallest?" The boy looked genuinely horrified. He snatched the little wolf back and set it firmly at the head of the row, ahead of all the others. "She's the strongest," he said, as if it were the most obvious truth in the world. And Cassian almost smiled. Almost. He watched the child return to his careful work, and then, quietly, he asked the thing that had been circling him for days. "Does your mother always have nightmares?" The small hands went still. For a moment, Cassian thought he would not answer. Then, "Sometimes," Cassian waited. "Sometimes she wakes up crying," Silas said, eyes fixed on the wolves. "She thinks I'm sleeping. I'm not always sleeping." Something twisted in Cassian's chest. "What does she cry about?" The boy shrugged, his small face scrunched in thought. "Maybe the same person she waits for." Cassian's heart skipped. "Waits for," he said, careful now. "What do you mean?" Silas lifted a hand and pointed at the window, at the long road beyond the palace walls, winding away into the distance. "The road," he said, "at night. She looks at it, and she thinks I'm asleep then too." The room seemed to grow smaller. "Who is she waiting for?" The boy picked up a wolf and turned it in his fingers. "Mama says she's not waiting." His voice dropped soft. "But she always looks." Then he looked up, and green eyes met green eyes. "I think she's waiting for somebody who forgot her." The word struck him like a fist. Forgot her. Something in Cassian's mind lurched sideways. A headache bloomed behind his eyes, sudden and sharp. Rain, a dark forest, a woman's laugh, low and warm. The images flared and were gone before he could hold a single one. He pressed his fingers to his temple. The pain ebbed, leaving only frustration behind. And beneath the frustration, something worse. The slow, dawning sense that a door in his own mind had been sealed shut, and that someone had done the sealing on purpose. Down the hall, Ilara had begun asking questions of her own. She was stronger now. She could feel it in her bones. The bruises were fading to yellow. Her arm ached less each day. Her body was mending, the way bodies do, whether or not the heart is ready. But mending was not the same as healing, and she had a great deal to do before she could let herself heal, because something had changed in her in that ruined cottage, in the moment those fists came down. For years she had kept her head low. She had swallowed the whispers. She had let them call her lazy and worthless and nothing, and she had said not a word. Because a servant with a child had no room to make enemies. She had made herself small, quiet, easy to overlook, and it had very nearly gotten her killed. Never again. The thought was quiet, but there was iron in it now. She was done being invisible. So she began, slowly, to gather the truth herself. She spoke to the older servants, the ones who had been here long enough to remember. She wrapped her questions in soft, idle talk, the way a woman learns to when she knows that curiosity can be dangerous. Most of them gave her nothing. A shrug, a change of subject, fear hiding behind a polite smile. But one old kitchen woman went pale when Ilara asked about that long-ago year. She set down her cup with a shaking hand. "We were told not to speak of it," she whispered. "The sickness. The king's lost week. There were others here then who saw things they shouldn't have, who asked questions they shouldn't have asked." Her eyes darted toward the door. "They were sent away, every one of them, far off, to the edges of the territory. And I never saw a single one of them again." Ilara held very still. The old woman looked at her for a long, long moment, and then, quieter still, she said the thing that turned Ilara's blood to ice. "You have his eyes on you now, child. The king's. He can't stop looking at you. or that boy of yours, the same way it was back then, with the one before you. A pause. It didn't end well for her. Be careful, please. The one before you. Ilara said nothing, but her hands did not shake, because piece by piece, a shape was forming, and it was not the shape she had believed in for 6 years. For 6 years, she had told herself that Cassian left her, that he woke one morning, remembered his crown, and chose it over her, that he had looked at the plain servant girl in the forest cottage and decided in the cold light of the palace that she had never been enough. She had built 6 years of grief on that single belief. But grief built on a lie is a different thing entirely. She did not have every piece yet, but she had enough to feel the ground move beneath her feet. And she made herself a second promise, standing there in the quiet kitchen with the old woman's warning still hanging in the air. This time, she would find the whole truth herself. She would not wait for anyone to bring it to her. She would never wait again. The door opened without a knock. Ilara turned, and there she stood, Vespera Kane. She entered the way she entered everything, chin lifted, gown flowing behind her, a smile arranged on her lips so precisely it looked painted on, but her eyes were cold. They flicked to the boy on the floor. Silas stiffened at once and edged toward the fireplace, putting distance between himself and the woman in the doorway. Vespera saw it. Her smile went thin. "You've recovered quickly," she said. "How very fortunate." Ilara said nothing. Vespera drifted further into the room, letting her gaze slide over the fine furnishings, the good bed, all the care that had been spent on a servant and her son. "He's been generous," she said lightly. "The king. All this time spent here. One might almost forget you're only a maid." "One might," Ilara said. 2 words. Quiet. Even. And there was something underneath them that made Vespera's eyes narrow, because this was not the trembling, downcast servant she remembered. Something in the girl had shifted. Some spine had grown where there had only been bowing before. Vespera did not like it. She crossed to the window, glancing out at the same road Ilara had been watching. And when she spoke again, all the false warmth had drained from her voice. "You should go home," she said, "when you're well enough. Back to that little cottage of yours. It would be best. For everyone." "Would it?" Ilara said. "The ceremony is close now." Vespera turned to face her fully. "The king and I. It was arranged a long time ago, and a wedding has no place for distractions." Her gaze slid, slow and deliberate, to Silas. And that was her mistake. Because when Vespera looked at the child, her mask slipped. Only for an instant. But Ilara was watching, the way she watched everything now. And what she saw was not annoyance, not jealousy, fear. The woman was afraid of a 5-year-old boy. And in that single unguarded heartbeat, Ilara understood something that turned her blood to ice for the second time that day. Vespera was not afraid of losing Cassian to a servant. Vespera was afraid of what that servant knew, of what the child was, of the truth that could come loose if either of them stayed too long inside these walls. Ilara kept her face perfectly smooth. She did not let a flicker of it show, but something clicked into place inside her, quiet and final. "I'll think about it," she said. Vespera studied her a moment longer, unsatisfied, uneasy. unable to name what had changed in the room. Then she turned and swept out, her gown whispering across the floor. The door closed behind her, and Alara let out a slow breath. Silas crept over and slipped his hand into hers, looking up with those wide green eyes. "I don't like her, Mama." Alara lowered herself carefully, ignoring the ache in her ribs, and smoothed his dark hair back from his face. "I know, baby," she murmured. "I know." She pulled him into her arms and held him, and over the top of his head, she looked once more at the road. But this time, she was not waiting. This time, she was thinking. Because the woman who had let them call her nothing for 6 long years was gone, and in her place stood someone new, someone who had been beaten and broken and locked away in the dark, and who had survived all of it. Someone with a son to protect, a truth to uncover, and a voice she was finally, slowly, beginning to find. Whoever had done this to her, whoever had reached into her life and torn it apart and buried the pieces where she would never find them, she was going to uncover them. And when she did, she was not going to be quiet. The days that followed changed something in the air between them. Cassian could feel it, though he could not name it. Every time he stepped into her wing, the room grew colder. Every time he tried to speak, she gave him a little less. Her answers came short and careful, each one set down like a stone between them. It was like speaking to someone who had already decided he was not worth her time. And that, more than the silence, more than the cold, was the thing that kept him from sleeping. Because Cassian Thorne was not a man who lost sleep over servants. He was losing it over her. She was healing. That was the trouble. Each day the bruises faded a little more. Each day she looked more like the woman from his broken dreams. And each day the dreams came harder. Rain on a roof. A hand resting in his own. A forest glowing silver under a full moon. And then always the dark, the same blank wall, the same nothing. He would wake with his heart slamming and her name half-formed on his lips, and no idea why. One evening he found himself outside her door again, without remembering he had decided to come. The guards bowed. He went in. The sitting room was empty. For a moment, he thought she might be resting. Then he heard it. A small laugh. His chest went tight. The sound drifted in from the balcony, and he followed it the way a starving man follows the smell of bread. Alara sat wrapped in a blanket, the last gold light of evening on her face. Silas knelt at her feet, holding up a drawing. A wolf. An extremely crooked wolf. And she was laughing. Softly, quietly, but laughing. Cassian stopped in the doorway, and something struck him so hard he forgot to breathe. He knew that laugh. Not from here, not from now, from somewhere lost, from somewhere sealed behind that wall in his mind. It was the laugh from his dreams. Silas saw him first. The smile vanished. Alara looked up, and the warmth drained from her face like a candle pinched out between 2 fingers. Just like that. Cassian hated it. For reasons he could not name, he hated it more than almost anything in the world. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Wonderful," she said. The sarcasm was sharp enough to cut. He let it go. "You should still be resting." She turned her face away, out toward the road beyond the walls, curving off toward the edge of the kingdom. He had watched her do that 3 times now, always looking, always searching, For what? For whom? She would not have told him if he had asked, but inside her chest, Ilara was fighting a battle he could not see, because his scent was everywhere now, in the room, on her son, woven into the very air she breathed, and her body still knew it. That was the cruelty of it. 6 years of grief had not taught her body to forget what her heart had tried so hard to bury. When he came close, something in her leaned toward him, something old, stubborn, foolish, and she hated that leaning. She hated that after everything, after 6 years of an empty road, after every night her son asked where his father had gone, some traitor part of her still turned toward this man, like a plant toward light. So she made her voice cold. She made her face like stone. It was the only armor she had left, and she wore it the way a soldier wears the last shield on the field. But her decision was already made. She would not stay in this gilded cage, close to the people who had likely put her in that cottage to die. She would take her son, and she would go. And she would keep uncovering the truth from a safe distance, on her own terms. So the next day, she went to him. She found him in his study, surrounded by reports he was not reading. She stood in the doorway with Silas at her side, and her chin lifted. "Is something wrong?" he asked, rising. Ilara folded her hands to keep them from trembling. "We're leaving." The words landed like a blow. Cassian blinked. "What?" "We're going home. The cottage is repaired. There's no reason to stay." "No." The word came out of him instantly, without thought, without permission. Her eyes narrowed. He pushed on. "It isn't safe out there. It's my home. Someone tried to kill you." "And," she said, and there was a dangerous flatness to it now, "you've done a great deal of nothing about it, haven't you?" That stopped him. "We're close," he said. "Close to finding who did this. If you leave these walls now, I can't keep you safe." The room went quiet. Ilara looked away. He watched her jaw tighten, watched her fight something down. Anger, grief, both. Then she crouched beside her son, and her voice went soft in an instant, gentle in a way it never was for anyone else alive. "Silas, would you go and play in the next room? Just for a few minutes, sweetheart." The boy looked between them. Children always sensed these things. "Okay," he said, and he gave her a small, bright smile, one that carried Cassian's own dimples, before slipping out and closing the door behind him. The sight of that smile hit Cassian somewhere deep, and then they were alone, and she looked ready to burn the room down. He opened his mouth. "Ilara, Crack. The slap rang out across the study. His head turned with the force of it. Silence. Neither of them moved. Neither of them breathed. Slowly, Cassian turned back to face her. And the shock on his face had nothing to do with the blow. No one in the kingdom would have dared strike him. She had struck an alpha. A king. That was not what stunned him. What stunned him were the tears standing in her eyes. Tears she was refusing, with everything she had, to let fall. Ilara stepped closer, close enough that he could see every crack in the wall she had spent 6 long years building, stone by careful stone. "I'm done," she said. Her voice shook, not with fear, with heartbreak. "What?" "I'm done being the one you all decided didn't matter." The words hit him like thrown rocks. Her chest rose and fell fast. She raised a trembling hand and pointed. You. A step forward. Your mother. Another. Vespera. Cassian went rigid. His wolf snapped to attention. For years I kept my head down. For years I let all of you decide what I was worth. Lazy. Difficult. Nothing. I heard every word. I swallowed every one of them. Her voice cracked. And I am done swallowing them. He stared at her, lost. Ilara, I don't understand what... Of course you don't. And there it was again. That look. That terrible disbelief, as though she were watching him deny something written across the sky. But this time, it was not only the memory driving her. It was 6 years of silence, finally breaking open. Do you know what it is, she said, to be treated like you're invisible? To work harder than anyone and be seen as less than everyone? To have your whole life decided by people who never once asked your name? Cassian said nothing. He could not. I let them, she went on, and now the tears were spilling over despite her. Because I thought I had no choice. Because a servant with a child doesn't get to speak. But I'm not going to be quiet anymore. Not for you. Not for any of them. And then, quieter, deadlier, she said the thing that undid him. We promised, beneath the moon, that no matter what happened, her voice broke clean in half, we would find our way back to each other. And Cassian's world came apart. Pain exploded behind his eyes. He staggered back a step. His breath went ragged. The edges of the room blurred and swam. Rain, a cottage, silver trees, a woman spinning beneath the moon, laughing, her hand reaching out for his, a promise, a vow, something bright and binding and true. Fragments slammed into him, hundreds, thousands, not enough to understand, just enough to tear. He seized his own head. A low growl ripped from his throat. The memories came faster. The moon, the forest, her hand in his, her voice saying his name in the dark, warm and unafraid. Then black, a wall of black where 6 years should have been. He nearly went down. Strong hands caught his arm, hers. For one instant, concern flashed across her face. Pure instinct, the oldest thing in her, reaching for him before her mind could stop it. For one instant, the wall was gone, and she was only a woman frightened for a man she had once loved past all reason. Then she remembered. The years, the road, the child crying for a father who never came, and the concern snuffed out, as though it had never lived at all. She stepped back. Her hands fell away. The walls rose again, higher and colder than before. Cassian looked up at her, breathing hard, drowning. Ilara. I can't do this. Quiet. Final. And she turned and walked out, leaving him on his knees, clutching his skull, while the first real pieces of a stolen life came breaking through the dark. But the walking away, that was hers. She wanted to be clear about that, even to herself, even as her hands shook on the walk back to her room. She had not fled. She had not crumbled. She had said her piece, every word of it, the words she had swallowed for 6 years, and then she had chosen to leave the room on her own 2 feet. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she had not stayed small. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed both hands over her mouth and let herself shake. Because she had seen it. The moment the memory took him, she had watched it break across his face, and it had not been the face of a man who had left her. It had been the face of a man being handed back something that had been torn out of him, live and bleeding, and that changed everything. For 6 years, she had held one belief up like a wall against the world, that he had chosen the crown, that he had looked at her and found her wanting, that his silence had been his answer. She had needed that belief. Even its pain had a shape she could carry. But if it was a lie, if someone had reached into his mind and cut her out of it, then her whole grief had been built on the wrong foundation. And a part of her did not know whether to weep or to rage. She wanted the rage. Rage was clean. Rage was safe. But underneath it, something far more dangerous was stirring. Not hope. She would not let herself call it hope. Hope was what had put her on that road, night after night, watching for a man who never came. Hope had nearly emptied her out completely. No. What stirred in her now was something harder and better. Resolve. She would not run to him because of a broken look and a shattered memory. She would not hand her heart back to anyone on the strength of a single moment. If there was truth here, she would dig it out herself. All of it. Every buried piece. And then, and only then, she would decide. Not his mother. Not Vespera. Not the crown. And not the bond. And not even his tears. Her choice, her voice, her judgment. For the first time in 6 years, the deciding would belong to her. And that, she realized, sitting in the quiet with her hands pressed to her mouth, that was worth more than any promise made under any moon. In his study, Cassian was still on the floor. The memories kept coming. Slow and without mercy, her door opening in the rain, her hands on his wounds, her voice arguing with him when he refused her medicine, her laugh when he tried to help with her chores and did everything wrong. A tiny kitchen, shared meals, long nights of talking about nothing at all, walks through the silver forest with the scent of wildflowers thick around them, and beneath the full moon, his wolf rising up in him with a certainty he had never felt before or since. Mate, not chosen, not arranged, not a matter of bloodlines and alliances. Fated. He remembered the vow, their joined hands, her smile, his own voice saying the words and meaning every one of them. No matter what happens, we'll always find our way back to each other. And then the last morning, the promise to return, just a few days, a kiss goodbye, her standing by the road, watching him ride away, trusting him with her whole heart, waiting for him. Cassian pressed the heels of his hands hard against his eyes, and for the first time since he had worn a crown, the Alpha King wept, not for himself, for her, for the woman who had waited by that road for 6 years, believing every single day that he had chosen someone else, for the boy who had learned to be silent in the dark, for every night she had cried, thinking her son asleep. He had not left her. He had never left her. Someone had made him leave. And as the grief burned through him, it began, slowly, to change, to harden, to take on an edge. Because he was beginning to understand exactly who had stood closest to him all these years, who had kept everyone from his bedside during that long-lost sickness, who had looked at a 5-year-old boy with fear in her eyes, who had exchanged one silent glance across a room still wet with blood. The people who had done this were not rogues. They were not enemies at the gates. They had been at his table the whole time, smiling, calling themselves family. Cassian rose slowly to his feet, And when he lifted his head, the tears were gone. In their place was something very quiet and very dangerous. But even as the fury filled him, one thought cut clean through it, sharp and humbling. She had walked away from him with her back straight. She did not need him to come charging in to save her. He had seen it in the set of her shoulders, in the steel that had come into her voice. This was a woman who had survived the worst the world could do, and was still on her feet, still fighting, still refusing to be made small. Whatever came next, she would not be waiting for him to rescue her. She would be deciding her own fate, and somehow that made him love her more than any moonlit vow ever had. That night, neither of them slept, but they were not thinking the same thoughts. Cassian sat alone in his chambers, and the truth kept unfolding in front of him, uglier with every hour. His mother, the bond, the stolen years. He was building a case in his mind, brick by brick, and every brick pointed the same way. Ilara sat alone in hers, with her son breathing softly beside her, and she was building something too. But it was not a case against anyone. She was building herself back. Here was the thing Cassian did not understand yet. The truth would not fix what had been broken. He believed in the simple way of men who have always held power, that if he could only prove what happened, if he could only name the guilty and make them pay, then everything would slide back into place. Ilara knew better. She had lived 6 years inside the wreckage. She knew that no confession could give her back the nights she had cried herself to sleep with her fist pressed against her mouth so the boy would not hear. No punishment could hand Silas back the father who had not been there for his first word, his first steps, his first fever burning through the dark while she rocked him alone. Some things do not come back. And so the question sitting in her chest was not, who did this? She was already close to that answer. She had felt it the moment she saw the fear flash in Vespera's eyes. The question was harder. The question was, what now? She thought about running. It would be easy. She could take Silas and slip away in the dark, back to the quiet edges of the world. Back to a life where no one knew her name, and no one owed her anything, and no one could ever hurt her again. She was good at disappearing. She had done it for years. But then she looked down at her son, sleeping with his small hand curled against her arm. And she asked herself a question she could not run from. What was she teaching him? If she took him and hid, what would he learn? That when the powerful hurt you, you vanish? That your voice is worth so little you keep it locked in your throat for the rest of your life? That the world belongs to people like Vespera, and people like them are only ever meant to bow? No, she would not teach him that. She had spent her whole life bowing. She had swallowed the whispers and lowered her eyes and made herself small enough to slip through every crack unnoticed. And it had very nearly ended with her dead on a cottage floor while her child listened from inside a cupboard. She was done teaching him to be small, because here was the truth she had finally reached, alone in the dark, after everything. If she wanted her son to grow up believing his voice mattered, then he had to see his mother use hers, out loud, in the open, where everyone could hear. That was the moment the fear finally loosened its grip on her. Not because she stopped being afraid. She was still afraid, but she had found something stronger than the fear at last. She had a reason now. A reason with green eyes and dark hair and her own stubborn chin. She barely slept, and when the gray light came, she did something she had never once done in all her years inside these walls. She asked to be seen, not summoned, not sent for. She walked on her own 2 feet through the halls where she had spent years keeping her head down, and this time she held it high. She requested an audience with the woman who had ruled these walls longer than Cassian had worn his crown, the Queen Mother, Cordelia Thorne. Cordelia received her in a cold and beautiful room. She sat like a portrait of herself, silver hair swept back, spine straight as a blade, that ageless, measuring gaze that had frightened stronger wolves into silence for decades. She looked at Alara the way one looks at a stain on fine cloth. "You have some nerve," Cordelia said, "asking to stand in front of me." "I do," Alara agreed. And that gave the Queen Mother pause, because the servant did not lower her eyes, did not tremble, did not shrink into herself the way servants had learned to shrink in this room. She simply stood there, calm, steady, and looked back. "Whatever you think you know," Cordelia said, "you would be wise to forget it, for your own sake, and the boys." There it was, the threat, thin and smooth, hidden under silk. Once it would have made Alara go cold with fear. Now it only steadied her. "I know that years ago there was a sickness in this palace," Alara said, her voice quiet and even. "I know servants were sent away after and never seen again. I know you kept the whole world from your son's side while he was healing." The Queen Mother's face did not move, but something flickered behind her eyes. "And I know," Alara went on, "that when your son carried in a child who wears his face, you stopped walking. Only for a heartbeat, but you stopped. I saw it." Silence. "You have no proof," Cordelia said at last, recovering. "You have a maid's stories, a maid's guesses. No one in this kingdom will listen to a servant girl." "Perhaps not." Alara took one step closer. "But I did not come here for your confession. I came to look at you. Once. Face to face. Because for 6 years, I let you and your kind decide exactly what I was worth, and you never once had to look me in the eye while you did it." The Queen Mother stared at her, and for the first time in a very long while, Cordelia Thorne felt something she deeply disliked. She felt seen. "Whatever you are," Alara said softly, "you do not get to decide what happens to me anymore, or to my son. Those days are finished." She turned to go. "You are nothing," Cordelia said to her back, sharp, cold, a final blow thrown because she had no others left in her hand. "A maid, a nobody. You always have been, and you always will be." Alara stopped at the door. She did not turn around. "You've called me that for years," she said, "and I almost believed you. For a long time, I did believe you." A pause. "But a nobody would already be gone, and I am still here." Then she walked out, and the Queen Mother sat alone in her beautiful cold room, and understood, slowly, that the quiet servant she had tried so carefully to erase was not going to erase. Alara did not get far. She turned a corner, and there, waiting in the shadow of a tall pillar, as though she had known this moment was coming, stood Vespera. The two women faced each other in the empty hall, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with any king, because they were not so different, and on some level, they both knew it. "You should have taken the offer," Vespera said. You should have gone home. Quietly. It would have been so much easier for you. Easier for you, you mean? Vespera's jaw tightened. Ilara studied her, truly studied her, for the first time, and what she saw beneath the fine gown and the cold beauty and the cruelty surprised her. Something familiar. You were like me once, Ilara said slowly. Weren't you? Vespera went still. Someone looked down on you too. Somewhere. Long ago. Someone told you that you were not enough. Wrong blood. Wrong name. Not born to the right people. Be quiet. And you decided, Ilara went on, gently, almost with pity, that the only way to make them stop was to become one of them, to climb so high that no one could ever call you nothing again. Vespera's hands had curled into fists at her sides. You built your whole life, Ilara said, on proving you had worth. And somewhere in all that climbing, you forgot you ever had any to begin with. You know nothing about me. I know you're afraid of a 5-year-old boy. Vespera flinched, and in that small flinch, Ilara saw the whole shape of it. The frightened girl underneath the future Luna. The one who had been made to feel worthless once, and had spent every year since trying to buy her worth back with titles and position and a crown she had schemed and lied to steal. It was a warning, standing right in front of her, because this was what Ilara could have become. This was the other road, the one where you let the people who scorned you teach you that value is a thing you take from others by force, rather than a thing you already carry inside. Vespera had let them convince her she was nothing, and she had spent her whole life trying to prove them wrong from the outside in, grasping, clawing, never filled. Ilara would not walk that road. She would not claw. She would not scheme. She would not build her worth on someone else's ruin, because her value had never depended on their permission. It never had. She saw that now with a clarity that felt almost like light breaking through cloud. I'm not going to fight you for him, Ilara said quietly. Vespera blinked. What? You think this is about the king? It isn't. It never was, for me. Ilara shook her head. You can have your crown, if that is what you believe will finally fill the hole they carved in you. But it won't. It never will. You could wear every title in this kingdom, and you would still hear their voices in the dark, telling you you're not enough. Vespera's face had gone pale. I know, Ilara said, because I heard those same voices for 6 years, and I finally worked out how to make them go silent. How? The word slipped out of Vespera before she could stop it. Raw, unguarded, the frightened girl showing plainly through the cracks in the mask. Ilara looked at her with something that was almost kindness. You stop asking them for your worth, she said. You just stop. And you decide it for yourself. That is the whole secret. It was there the entire time. Then she walked away and left Vespera standing alone in the empty hall, holding nothing at all. That evening, Ilara sat on the floor of her room with Silas, building long rows of little wooden wolves in the last of the light. She was calm now, calmer than she had been in years, because she had made her choice, and it was not the choice any of them expected. She was not going to run, and she was not going to pour her strength into revenge, letting hatred hollow her out the way it had hollowed out Vespera, one grasping year at a time. She was going to do something harder than either. She was going to stand up in the open in front of the whole pack, and she was going to speak the truth of what had been done to her. Not so that someone would rescue her, not so that she could watch her enemies burn, but because she had spent her entire life unheard, overlooked, called nothing by people who never once learned her name. And her son was watching now. He needed to see that a person's voice mattered, that the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones the powerful waved away as nothing, could stand up straight and be heard. That was the only thing worth doing with the truth, not vengeance, witness. "Mama," Silas said, lining up his wolves with great care. "Yes, baby." "Are we in trouble?" Ilara looked at him, at his serious little face, at the green eyes so much like his father's, and the stubbornness in his jaw that was entirely, unmistakably, her own. "No," she said, "we are not in trouble." She reached out and set the smallest wolf at the head of the row, ahead of all the others, the way he always did. "We are just done being quiet." Across the palace, Cassian stood at his window, looking out at the same road she had watched for 6 years. He had gathered what he needed. He knew what he meant to do at the ceremony. He was ready to tear the whole arrangement down in front of everyone who mattered. And yet, a strange humility had settled over him, because for 6 years he had held all the power in the kingdom, and he had been helpless, blind, led by the hand into a lie. And she, a servant with nothing, no title, no crown, no army at her back. She had survived. She had raised their son. She had held herself whole through a grief that should have broken her into pieces. He had thought at first that he would be the one to save her, to ride in and set it all right and hand her back her stolen life like a gift. Now at last, he understood. She did not need saving. She had already saved herself, quietly, over 6 long years, in a way he was only now beginning to see the shape of. The most he could do, the most he had any right to do, was stand behind her when the moment came, and let her speak. The whole kingdom came to celebrate. None of them knew they were coming to a funeral, not for a person, for a lie. Golden banners hung from the palace walls, snapping softly in the morning breeze. Flowers lined the ceremonial path. Wolves filled the great courtyard until there was barely room to stand. Nobles in fine cloth, warriors with straight backs, pack elders with silver in their hair. Every soul who held any weight in the kingdom had gathered beneath a bright and cloudless sky. This was meant to be a day the pack would remember for generations, the joining of the Alpha King and his chosen Luna, the dawn of a new age. At least, that was what every one of them believed. Vespera looked radiant. A silver gown poured around her like moonlight made solid. Jewels caught the sun at her throat and her wrists. Her smile did not falter, not once, and for the first time in many days she seemed almost at peace. Because Cassian had barely spoken since that night in his study. He had not raged, he had not accused, he had gone quiet, and she had told herself, the way she's always told herself, that his silence meant surrender, that in the end he would do what he had always done, choose the crown, choose the kingdom, choose her. She was wrong. She had built her whole life on reading powerful people correctly, and on this one day, the most important day of all, she had read him completely wrong. Cassian stood at the top of the ceremonial platform, dressed in black from collar to boot, his face as unreadable as carved stone. The crowd watched him with shining eyes. The elders smiled. Somewhere below, musicians played something soft and full of hope. Everything was perfect, and Cassian felt nothing at all. No joy, no dread, no anticipation, only a cold and settled certainty, sitting low in his chest like a stone. He looked out over the sea of upturned faces, and somewhere near the back, where the servants were made to stand, in the place reserved for the ones no one was meant to notice, he found the only face that mattered. Ilara. She was not dressed for a wedding. She wore her own plain clothes, and she held her son's small hand, and she stood among the people the pack had trained itself never to see. But she was not small today. Her chin was lifted, her shoulders were square, and when her eyes found his across all that distance, she did not lower them. Something passed between them, not a plea, not a promise, an understanding. This moment was hers, not his. He had spent the sleepless nights before this day imagining how he would tear the ceremony down, how he would speak the truth and hand her back everything that had been taken, how he would be the one to set it right. And then he had understood, slowly, that setting it right was not his to do. The most he could give her was the silence at the start. He gave her the smallest nod. Then he turned to face the crowd. The head elder stepped forward, arms lifting, his old voice ringing out across the courtyard. Today, we gather beneath the blessing of the moon. Stop. One word. It cut across the courtyard like a blade dropped onto stone. Silence crashed down. Complete. Total. The kind of silence 1,000 wolves make when every one of them has stopped breathing in the same instant. The elder blinked, his arms still half raised. Vespera's smile froze on her painted lips. Cassian stepped forward, slow and deliberate, and let his power roll out across the courtyard. It moved through the crowd like a cold wind off a mountain. Thousands of wolves felt it and went still, heads dipping on instinct, every eye rising to the platform, waiting. Vespera looked up at him, and for one heartbeat, her face filled with something like hope, as though he were about to declare his love for her in front of the entire kingdom. Then he spoke, and it all came apart. There will be no joining today. The words landed, and the courtyard broke into gasps. Vespera went white. What? The whisper escaped before she could stop it. Cassian, what are you saying? But Cassian was not finished, and he was not looking at her. For 6 years, he said, and his voice carried to every far corner of that vast space. This kingdom has lived inside a lie. And I lived inside it too. I simply did not know. The murmurs rose like a tide coming in. Many of you remember a sickness that nearly killed me years ago. A poisoning that stole a week of my life, or so you were told. The word cracked through the crowd. Poisoning. It leapt from mouth to mouth. What none of you were told, Cassian went on, relentless now, is that there was a second poison, one that never touched my body at all. His jaw tightened. It touched my mind. It took 6 years. It took a woman I loved more than the crown on my head, and it took a child I never knew I had. His eyes moved, and the whole crowd's eyes moved with them, to the small figure standing at the back, holding a little boy by the hand. The courtyard erupted. For a long moment, chaos ruled. Voices rose everywhere at once, questions Denials, shock rolling out through the crowd in waves. Nobles turned to one another with wide eyes. Elders half rose from their carved seats. A child. His child. The words tore through the pack like fire through dry summer grass. And in the middle of the storm, Vespera stood frozen. All the color drained from her face, her jeweled hands beginning to tremble. "No," she breathed. "No, no. This is madness. Cassian, listen to me. She is a servant. She is nothing. She is lying to you. She has poisoned your mind against—" "Be careful," Cassian said, very quietly, and the quiet of it was more frightening than any shout. Vespera fell silent. Then Cassian did the thing no one expected. He stepped back. He did not accuse her further. He did not lay out his evidence. He did not finish the story he had begun. Instead, he turned, and he looked to the back of the courtyard, and he waited. And slowly, the whole kingdom began to understand that the king was not going to speak the rest, that someone else would. The crowd began to part. Wolves stepped aside, murmuring, staring, until a clear path opened from the platform all the way to the small woman in plain clothes at the back. Every eye in the kingdom turned to her. The servant girl, the nobody, the one they had all been taught not to see. And Alara stood there in the sudden crushing weight of 1,000 stares, her son's hand in hers, and felt her heart slamming so hard against her ribs, she thought it might break free. This was the moment. Everything in her whole life had led here. She had spent weeks gathering the truth in whispers and half-memories. She had learned the names of the ones sent away. She had heard the warning of the old kitchen woman, the story of the one who came before her. She could have handed all of it to the elders and let them weigh it like judges, and waited for their verdict. But she had decided, long ago now, that she would never again beg these people to believe her. She would not lay her truth at their feet like a servant offering up a tray. She would simply stand in front of them and let them look, and let them choose what kind of people they wanted to be. She could still stay silent, even now. She could let Cassian finish. Let the king tell her story from the height of his platform. Hand her justice down like a coin dropped into an open palm. It would be easier, but her son was looking up at her, and she had made herself a promise. She was done being spoken for. She let go of Silas's hand. She crouched down in front of him, right there in the middle of that vast, silent crowd, and she pressed a kiss to his forehead. "Watch, baby," she whispered, so only he could hear. "Watch what it looks like." Then she straightened, and she walked forward. Every step rang out in the silence. She walked down that long parted path with her back straight and her head high, past the nobles who had never once learned her name, past the elders who had never looked at her face, past the warriors and the highborn and all the powerful people who had spent years quietly deciding she was worth nothing at all, and not one of them could look away from her now. She reached the platform. She climbed the steps, one by one, her plain shoes on the polished stone. She stopped beside Cassian, but she did not stand behind him. She did not stand in his shadow. She stood next to him, level with the king, in front of the whole world. And then she turned to face the crowd, and for a moment no sound came out of her at all. Her mouth had gone dry. 6 years of silence pressed down on her throat like a hand. All the swallowed words, all the whispers she had never answered, All the times she had lowered her eyes and let them believe whatever they wished. The old fear rose up in her, one last time, the voice that had kept her small for so long. Who are you to speak? You are nothing. No one listens to a maid. And then she looked out over the crowd, and near the front she found a face she knew. The old kitchen woman, the one who had warned her, the one who had spent a whole lifetime being unseen, exactly as Alara had. The old woman was watching her with wide, shining eyes, and she gave the smallest nod. That was all Alara needed. She lifted her voice. My name, she said, is Alara Hale. It rang out clear across the courtyard, and the sound of her own name in her own mouth steadied her like nothing else could have. Most of you have never heard it. Some of you have passed me in these halls 1,000 times, and never once looked at my face. I have carried your trays. I have swept your floors. I have stood at the edges of your grand celebrations and made myself invisible, because I was taught, from the time I was a girl, that invisible was all a person like me was ever meant to be. She drew a breath. But I am not invisible, and I am finished letting any of you pretend that I am. Not a single soul moved. Years ago, I found a stranger dying in the rain, she said. I did not know he was a king. I did not care. I only knew that he was hurt and that he needed help. So I took him in. I healed him. And in those quiet days, far from all of this, we came to love each other. Not for crowns, not for titles, not for bloodlines. For who we were when no one was watching us at all. Her voice did not shake now. It grew stronger with every word, the way a river grows stronger the farther it runs from its source. He promised he would come back to me, and then he was gone. And for 6 years, I believed he had chosen this life over me. I believed every single day that I simply had not been enough. She let that sit in the air. I raised his son alone. I watched that little boy ask me, over and over, where his father was, and I never had an answer to give him. I waited for a man I thought had forgotten I existed. And all that time, this palace looked at me and called me lazy, difficult, worthless, nothing. Her eyes swept slowly across the vast crowd. But I was not forgotten, she said. I was erased, on purpose, by people standing in this very courtyard. She turned then, not to Cassian, to Vespera, trembling in her ruined silver, and to the Queen Mother, seated stiff and pale upon the royal platform above. You took his memory, Ilara said. You took my son's father out of his mind like tearing a page from a book. You sent away everyone who might have spoken the truth. I know their names now. I know what happened to them. The Queen Mother lost the last of her color. You buried it all so deep that even he could not find it. And I was not the first, was I? There was a woman before me. You have been doing this a long time. Her voice dropped, and somehow the quiet of it carried further than any shout. And when I still would not disappear, when I kept living, kept working, kept raising my child in the daylight where you wanted only silence and shadow. She paused. You sent someone to that cottage to make me vanish for good, with my son locked in a cupboard, listening to every second of it. A sound moved through the crowd, low, dark, the sound of 1,000 wolves beginning all at once to understand. Vespera stumbled back a step. That is a lie, she said, but her voice cracked straight down the middle. You have no proof. You have nothing. You are a servant. You cannot simply stand here and... I have no proof I could lay in your hands, Ilara agreed. And the calm honesty of it silenced the courtyard more completely than any accusation could have. I am not asking this kingdom to believe me, because I can prove it to a council. I am asking them to do something they have never once done in all my years inside these walls. She spread her hands. I am asking them to look at me, truly look, and decide for themselves whether the woman standing in front of them, saying these words out loud with her son watching, sounds like a liar. Silence. You called me nothing for 6 years, she said. And today, I climbed onto this platform, in front of all of you, and I told you exactly who I am. A nobody could not do that. A nobody would already be gone. She turned back to the crowd, and her voice rose one final time, clear and unbreakable. I did not come here for revenge. I did not even come here for him. A brief glance at Cassian. I came because my whole life, people like you decided what people like me were worth and never once let us answer. Today, I am answering, and I am never going to be quiet again. For a moment, nothing. And then, from somewhere in that enormous crowd, a single voice rose. The old kitchen woman. I believe her. 3 words. They dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. And then another voice joined. And another. The servants first. The unseen ones. The ones who had spent their lives pressed to the edges of every great occasion. Their voices rose one by one, then in 2s and 3s, and then in a wave, until the courtyard filled with the sound of the overlooked, finally, all together, refusing to be quiet. Ilara stood at the center of it, and her eyes filled. And this time, she let the tears fall. Because these were not the tears she had cried in the dark for 6 years, alone, with her fist against her mouth. These were something else entirely. Cassian watched her, and his chest ached with something far too large to name. He had come here today to give her justice, and she had not needed him to give her anything at all. She had taken it, in front of the whole world, with nothing but her own voice and her own name, and the truth she carried in her body. Now and only now did he step forward, because there was one thing left that was truly his to do. He turned to Vespera, who stood small and shaking in her silver gown, all of her radiance stripped away. "Cassian, please," she whispered. "I love you. Everything I did because No." The single word silenced her. He looked at her for a long moment, and beneath his fury, for just a breath, there was something almost like sorrow, because Ilara had been right about her. He could see it now, plainly, the frightened, grasping thing beneath all that cold beauty. The girl who had been made to feel worthless once, and had spent her whole life trying to steal her worth back from the world, one cruelty at a time. "You could have been anything," he said quietly, "and you chose to become this." Then he lifted his voice for the crowd. "Vespera Kane, you are stripped of every title, every claim, every place in this pack. You will leave this territory before the sun sets tonight, and you will never set foot in it again." Vespera collapsed to her knees. A broken cry tore out of her, and the whole courtyard watched a schemer's entire life come undone in a single breath. It was absolute. It was public. There would be no returning from it. Then Cassian turned to the royal platform. to his mother. Cordelia sat frozen, and for the first time in his life, Cassian saw her look truly old. Mother. The word cost him something, and everyone could hear that it did. You will leave the palace. You will hold no more power over its affairs. You will never again sit at this throne's side, or whisper in its ear, or shape a single choice made in this kingdom. The Queen Mother's eyes filled, but she did not argue, because there was nothing left to argue. For 6 years, she had looked away from the suffering of a servant girl she had judged too far beneath her to matter. And now that girl stood on the platform above her, seen and heard by the whole kingdom, while the Queen Mother sat below in silence, small for the first time in her long and powerful life. When it was over, when the crowd still roared and Vespera still wept upon the stone, and the elders still scrambled to make sense of a day that had rewritten the kingdom in a single hour, Ilara looked out across all of it and found her son. Silas stood exactly where she had left him, small in the vast crowd, staring up at his mother on the platform with wide green eyes. And he was not afraid. He was watching her the way a child watches something he will carry with him for the rest of his life. His mother, the one they had all called nothing, standing above them all now, heard at last by every soul in the kingdom. Ilara looked back at him, and through her tears, she smiled. Because this was the thing she had climbed onto that platform to do. Not to win a king, not to punish the ones who had hurt her, but to show her son, with her whole body and her whole voice, in front of the entire world, what it looks like when someone who has been told over and over that they are nothing finally stands up straight and refuses, at last, to believe it. The cottage looked exactly as it always had. Small, simple, sitting alone at the edge of the forest, where the trees grew old and the road ran quiet. Cassian stood at the end of that dirt road and, for a long while, could not make himself move. Because this was where it had happened. This was where he had found her, broken and bleeding in her own home. This was where once, long before that, he had fallen in love with a woman who had no idea he was a king. This was where he had promised, under a full moon, to come back to her. And this was where she had spent 6 years waiting for a promise the world had broken in his name. The weight of it nearly folded him where he stood. His wolf was silent, not calm, ashamed, and Cassian understood the feeling completely, because he carried the very same shame in his own chest. Word of what had happened at the ceremony had raced through the kingdom within hours, but Ilara had not stayed to hear it. She had not celebrated. She had not gloated. She had not lingered even a moment to watch her enemies fall. The instant it was done, she had taken her son's hand and come home, to the small cottage at the edge of the forest, as though the crown, the platform, the roaring courtyard, none of it had ever truly mattered to her at all. And maybe it hadn't. Maybe, Cassian thought, that had always been the difference between them. He had spent his life believing power was the thing that made a person matter. She had never once believed that, even when the whole world tried to teach it to her. He walked up the small wooden steps. His heart was pounding. He knocked. For a moment, silence. Then the door opened, and Ilara stood there, and the sight of her hurt more now than it ever had before, because now he remembered everything, every smile, every quiet night by the fire, every promise they had whispered under a silver moon. All of it gone. all of it stolen. 6 years he could never give back to her. Her eyes hardened the instant she saw him. She began to close the door. He stopped it, not with force, with something closer to desperation. Please. The words slipped out of him. Raw, cracked, real. Elara went still, because she had never once heard Cassian Thorne say that word. Not to anyone. Kings did not beg. Alphas did not beg. And yet, here he was, on her doorstep, begging. I remembered, he said, and whatever strength had held her expression together cracked, just slightly, at the edges. He saw it. The pain. The old grief. And underneath all of it, buried deep, the thing she had spent 6 years trying to kill. Hope. Still, she said nothing. So he told her. Everything. The poison. The stolen memory. His mother. Vespera. The lies fed to him spoonful by spoonful. The years torn out of both their lives. He held nothing back. He softened nothing. He made no excuse for himself, because there was none worth making. And when he finished, the little cottage was silent. Elara sat down slowly at the small worn table. Her hands trembled, just faintly, in her lap. Cassian could not read her face, and that frightened him more than anything in the world, because he would rather have faced 100 enemies than her silence. At last, she spoke. I waited. Her voice was barely above a breath. Cassian closed his eyes. The words cut deeper than any blade could have. I know, he said, every single day. I stood by that road, and I waited. I know. At first I told myself you had been delayed, that something had kept you, and any moment you would come walking back up that road to me. Her voice caught on the memory. Then I told myself you had forgotten. And then, after long enough, she stopped. Then I told myself you had simply never loved me enough to return. The confession shattered him, because for 6 years, that had been her truth. The story she had told herself in the dark. The quiet, poisonous belief that had slowly hollowed her out from the inside. Not that the world had wronged her, that she, herself, had not been worth coming back for. That was the wound, not the waiting. The waiting was only the shape of it. The wound was that she had been taught, one silent night at a time, to believe she was not enough. The tears rose in her eyes, not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the dangerous kind, the kind that come from being hurt too deeply, for too long, by too many. Cassian moved closer, slowly, carefully, the way a person approaches a wounded creature that has every reason in the world to run. Elara. His voice broke on her name, and the sound of it startled them both. I am so sorry. The apology felt useless, far too small for the size of what had been broken, but it was all he had, and he laid it down at her feet without holding anything back. A small voice interrupted from the doorway. Mama. Silas stood there, watching, listening, understanding, in the way children do, far more than anyone intended. Cassian stepped back at once, giving the boy room. Silas came forward slowly, his green eyes fixed on the large stranger who kept appearing at his mother's door, curious, cautious, weighing him the way children weigh the things that matter most. And Elara wiped her eyes and gathered herself and drew her son close, because whatever happened next, she would decide it. Not the crown, not the ancient bond, not even the tears of a king. Her. That was the truth she held on to now, above every other, the deciding, was hers. Over the weeks that followed, Cassian came back again and again and again, not as an alpha, not as a king. He left the crown behind at the palace, and he walked up that dirt road as nothing more than a man who had missed everything and knew it, and did not pretend for a single second that he hadn't. He did not demand a place in their lives. He asked for one, and he accepted, without complaint, that the answer might always be no. That was new for him. Learning to ask instead of command. Learning to wait instead of take. Learning that some things cannot be seized by force, or bought, or ruled into being. Some things can only be given, freely, or not at all. And slowly he began to grasp the true size of what he had lost. He learned that Silas had taken his first steps on a rainy afternoon, right here in this cottage, holding on to the leg of that very table. Cassian had not been there. He learned that the boy's first word had not been mama, or wolf, or moon. It had been bird. Because one gray morning, a small brown bird had landed on the windowsill, and Silas had pointed and laughed with his whole tiny body. Cassian laughed too when he heard it, and then, a heartbeat later, felt the tears sting behind his eyes, because he had missed that too. He learned about the birthdays, small ones, a homemade cake with the frosting slightly wrong, a handful of little gifts made by hand. Silas proudly showed him every drawing he had ever saved, every treasure pressed between the pages of a book, every small relic of a childhood his father had never seen. And Cassian took all of it in, greedily, painfully, trying to fill 6 years that could never truly be filled. But here is the thing. This was never really a story about a man earning back what he had lost. While Cassian was learning to be a father, Ilara was doing something far more important. She was learning to see herself the way she should have been seen all along. For 6 years, she had built her entire self around an absence, around waiting, around a wound that would not close, and a belief that would not die. The belief that she had been lacking, insufficient, not enough to be loved, not enough to be kept, not enough to matter. And now that she knew the truth, now that she knew none of it had ever been about her worth at all, she had a harder task in front of her than any confrontation with a queen or a rival. She had to unlearn the lie, because the lie had lived in her for so long that it had grown into the very shape of her. She had swallowed it so many times, it had become part of how she stood, how she spoke, how she moved through the world with her head bowed and her eyes low. Pulling it out was slow work, painful work, root by stubborn root. But she did it. She planted a garden behind the cottage, something she had never once let herself do, because gardens are for people who believe they deserve to stay. And for 6 years, she had lived like a guest in her own life, always half expecting to be sent away, always braced for the world to decide she did not belong. Now she pressed seeds into the dark earth and watched green things push up toward the sun. She spoke her mind out loud without swallowing the words first. She had found her voice on that platform in front of the whole kingdom, and she would sooner die than lose it again. And when Cassian came to the door, she did not open it out of duty, or fear, or the old pull of a bond she had not asked for. She opened it when she chose to, and she left it shut when she did not. Her choice. Every single time. That was the thing she would never surrender again, no matter what came, no matter who asked. One evening, they sat together outside on the wooden steps. The sun was going down behind the forest, turning the whole sky the color of embers and old gold. Cassian had spent the entire day mending the cottage fence. His hands were dirty, his fine shirt was smudged with sap and dust, and he looked more at peace than he had in years. Silas sat between them, swinging his legs, humming a small tune to himself. For the first time, the boy looked genuinely comfortable in Cassian's presence. Not wary, not braced, just easy, the way a child is easy only when he feels safe. And that ease meant more to Cassian than any crown he had ever worn. Then Silas spoke, quietly, in the simple, honest way of children who have been turning something over in their minds for a long time. If you loved Mama, Cassian went still. Why didn't you come back? Silence. The question was not cruel. It was not angry. It was pure. A little boy trying, with his whole small heart, to understand a thing that did not make sense to him. Cassian looked out at the fading light and searched for an answer, and found that not one of the answers he had was enough. Because what explanation could ever be enough? Someone stole my memories. Someone lied. Someone reached into my mind and took you and your mother out of it. All of it true, and none of it undid the simple fact the boy was pointing at with such quiet honesty. He had not been there. Cassian swallowed hard, his throat burning. I wanted to, he said. The words sounded thin, even to his own ears. Silas waited, patient, watching. Cassian looked down at his own two hands, the same hands that should have caught his son when he wobbled through those first steps, the same hands that should have held him through every fever in the long dark, the same hands that had come 6 years too late. I wanted to come back every single day of my life, he said, and his voice broke clean in half. I just didn't know I was supposed to. Someone made me forget you, and forgetting you is the greatest sorrow I will ever carry. It always will be. And then, for the first time since he had become an alpha, for the first time since a crown had been set on his head, Cassian Thorne wept, not loudly, not for show, just quietly, like a man grieving something he could never get back. Silas stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, the boy scooted closer until their shoulders touched. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The small gesture nearly undid Cassian completely, because it felt like the very beginning of forgiveness. Not all of it. Not yet. But enough. Enough to hope. Ilara watched the two of them from the doorway, her son leaning gently against the father he was only now beginning to know, the man who had come back at last and asked for nothing but the chance to try. And something in her chest, something that had been clenched tight and aching for 6 long years, began, very slowly, to loosen. But she was not ready yet, and she had learned, at long last, that it was all right not to be ready, that she did not owe anyone her forgiveness on their timetable, that healing was not a debt she was required to pay, but a road she got to walk at her own pace, in her own time, choosing each step for herself. That, too, was a kind of power, a quiet one, the most important one she had ever claimed. The days turned into weeks. The weeks softened into a quiet season. And one night, long after Silas had drifted off to sleep, Ilara stepped out onto the porch, where Cassian sat looking up at the moon, the same moon that had once watched two young people make a promise. She sat down beside him, not close, but not far either. For a while, neither of them spoke. The forest breathed around them. An owl called once, far off. Then Ilara said, "I need you to understand something." Cassian turned to her. "If I let you peek into this life," she said, choosing each word with care, "it will not be because a bond told me to. It will not be because of some vow we made when we were young and had no idea what the world could do to two people who dared to love each other." She looked at him, steady and unflinching. "It will be because I choose it, and that means it can never, ever be taken for granted. Not by you, not by anyone, not for the rest of my life." "I understand," Cassian said quietly. "I am not the girl you found in the rain," she went on. "That girl waited for 6 years, believing she was worthless, because everyone around her told her she was, and she had no one to tell her otherwise. That girl is gone." "I know." The woman sitting on this step does not wait for anyone. Her voice was calm, certain, unhurried. She decides. She speaks. She knows exactly what she is worth, and she no longer needs a king or a crown or an ancient bond to tell her. If you want to be part of this life, then understand that it is a life she is in charge of, not you. Never again anyone but her. Cassian was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something no one in that entire kingdom would ever have believed. The Alpha King rose from the step, and he knelt down in the dirt in front of a servant girl's cottage. And he looked up at her, not as a king gazing down from a great height, but as a man looking up at the person who held his whole heart in her hands. "Then let me spend the rest of my life," he said, "earning a small place in a life that belongs entirely to you." And Ilara looked at him, and for the first time in 6 years, she let herself believe it might be possible, not because a bond commanded it, not because she had no other choice, but because she had weighed him and judged him and chosen, with her own clear mind, with her own eyes wide open, her choice. That was the whole miracle of it. Not the reunion, not the moonlight. The fact that after everything, the choosing was finally wholly hers. She did not fall into his arms. That is not how it happened. There was no swell of music, no perfect ending tied off in a single night. What there was instead was a beginning, a real one, slow and honest and earned inch by inch. He came back the next day, and the day after that. He learned to be a father one small moment at a time. He learned Silas's favorite stories and the songs that eased him towards sleep, and the exact trick to fixing the wobble in the old kitchen chair. And Ilara let him in a little further with each passing week. Not because she had forgotten what was done to her. She would never fully forget it. But because she had decided at last that her one precious life would not be built on the wreckage of her past. She would not spend her days as a woman defined by what had been taken from her. She would be defined instead by what she had built with her own hands, by what she had survived, by the voice she had found, and would never again let anyone silence. That was the transformation. Not that she got the king, not that her enemies fell, but that the woman who had been told 1,000 times, in 1,000 small ways, that she was nothing, had finally come to know all the way down to her bones, that she never had been. Months later, on a night when the moon hung full and silver above the trees, the three of them sat together on the cottage steps. Silas held a new wooden wolf in his hands. One Cassian had carved for him by firelight, clumsily at first, then better. The boy set it carefully at the head of his long row of little wolves. "That's the strongest one," he announced. "Oh?" Cassian said, smiling. "Is it the alpha, then?" Silas looked at him the way children look at adults who have said something very silly indeed. "No," he said, patient. "It's Mama." And he placed the little wolf down at the very front, ahead of all the others, exactly where it belonged. Ilara laughed, softly, freely, the kind of laugh that rises up from somewhere deep, somewhere that had been locked shut for a very long time, and was only now, finally, easing open again. And Cassian looked at her in the moonlight, at the woman who had been called nothing, and who had proven every last one of them so completely wrong. He had not saved her. She had never needed saving. She had saved herself, quietly, over 6 long and lonely years, and then loudly, in front of the whole kingdom, in a single, unforgettable hour when she climbed a platform in her plain clothes and spoke her own name out loud. All he could ever do now, all he would gladly spend the rest of his days doing, was be grateful that she had chosen to let him stay. The road beyond the cottage was quiet now. Ilara did not look at it anymore. For 6 years, that road had held all her hope and all her waiting. But there was nothing out there for her to watch for now. Everything she needed was right here, on these worn steps, in her son's easy laughter, in the garden pushing up green behind the house, in a love she had weighed with her own hands and chosen with her own eyes open. A soft wind moved through the garden, carrying the scent of turned earth and wood smoke, and the woman they had all called Nothing sat between her son and the quiet beginning of a life that was entirely her own. And finally, after everything that had been taken from her and everything she had reclaimed, felt whole,